Welcome back to Consider This. Melisa and Sharaad here with you. Now, recently, the Home Ministry announced that the Prisons Department will be looking into a proposal to set up private prisons in Malaysia. What are the pros and cons of such a move? To discuss this, we have on the line with us Jerald Joseph, one of the commissioners for the National Human Rights Commission of Malaysia, better known as SUHAKAM. Jerald, thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, you've done work for SUHAKAM focusing on prisons in Malaysia. What do you make of this idea to look into private prisons?
Good evening. I think the prison condition needs some answers. Whether the shortcut answer to privatize prison is the way forward, I'm not convinced. Because the background to a lot of the problems in prison is lack of budget allocation. And it's expensive ventures to even maintain the present prisons in the country. There's the 73,000 prisoners presently, and I think it's like almost 35% over the limit of the designated numbers for all the prisons in the country. So I think even with the present prisons, we are finding it difficult to maintain. And then if you want to privatize, and usually privatization comes with a cost, and that cost is normally not a small cost. So I wonder how we're going to move into that if there are budget constraints.
Jerald, let's just look at some of the, it gets a little more granular on some of the problems you say that emanate from a lack of funding for the prisons. We've mentioned overcrowding, which seems to be on the lips of people who are advocates of this privatization move. But let's leave the privatization issue for a while. Let's look at disease. What do we know about disease present in our prisons? We've had reports on the number of prisoners coming into the system with AIDS-related diseases. We also have heard of tuberculosis re-emerging in our prisons, affecting not just prisoners, but also the staff. Tell us about the disease issue.
Okay. So with overcrowding and old prisons, health is a big issue. I think the largest health condition that needs attention is scabies. Scabies is a mite, a small mite that can be cleaned up by fumigation, washing the clothes or stuff like that. But almost every prison we go is infested with mites, and so scabies. Every prisoner will tell us about they'll be scratching all parts of their body, and it's cyclical. You give a little bit of topical medicine, it disappears, and then it comes back. So that's one of the big concerns, scabies, that is quite prevalent in all prisons. Of course, the other one, TB, which is small, and or HIV/AIDS, which is also small, and the prison have its own system of managing separation of prisoners away from the others. So they sort of house them away from the other blocks so that they can heal and get better. So TB is happening, but it's not at a large scale. It's contained because there is a medical doctor. All prisons have a doctor at hand. They have a clinic within the prison compound. So, yes, health is a big concern. You need a bit more personnel, you need more money for medicine because you're managing huge numbers of people. But I think the bottom line is the conditions of the prison. And it's not the beautiful pictures we see of foreign prisons, where it's comfortable beds, two to a room. There's a sink there for you to wash your face, and toilet that is functioning. It's like 5-6 crammed into a small space designed for two or three.
Jerald, there is a perception out there that prisoners don't deserve comfortable conditions, that in fact, the fact that they're suffering is part of the punishment. I mean, isn't there a public perception that needs to kind of shift when it comes to thinking about the conditions of those facilities?
So I think, we're not offering them hotel facilities. That's a given because it is a punishment. It is a legal provision to take away your liberties. But even the prisons were designed lawfully, following gazetting a specific number for a cell unit. So it was designed for maybe 5 people when they calculated the space and all that. But now it's not. So although they're supposed to already suffer just by being incarcerated, I think that itself, and living in a cell from morning to night, and that's already suffering which is legally prescribed. Anything more and beyond because of the inability of the government to provide more prisons is actually above the legal requirements that was actually prescribed by law. So,
Right.
so while society feels it is punishment, it is not wrong, but what I call over-punishment, which was not designed, and I think that's where we need to bring back the humanity, the humane conditions, and what we will call the minimum standard
In
for any
prisons,
person. in
Jerald,
prison.
I want to come back to something you said, something extraordinary you said earlier. We are 35% over the limit when it comes to our prison population. Can you talk to us about how we got to this point? How did we get to a point where our prisons are completely overrun?
So that's because I suppose there's a lot of people who get arrested. And the largest number, if I don't get my facts mixed up, I mean, this can be verified, about 45 to 50% are drug-related offenders. So these are drug abusers. I'm not talking about the traffickers. That's a small number, the ones in the trade. But most of them are drug users, drug abusers. They too will end up in the prison. So that takes a big chunk of the prison space, which is a question...
Right, Jerald, that precisely because one of the arguments made about decriminalizing drug use was precisely the question of overcrowding, that almost immediately we would see a change in the prison population as a consequence and the related costs. It seems to me that the ministries might not be talking to each other. We have the Home Ministry talking about privatization, whereas, and maybe using the overcrowding as a justification, but then you also have the Law Minister speaking about decriminalizing. Is there kind of a conversation, do you think, or not happening between the ministries?
So I think everybody is trying to find a solution because the decriminalizing movement is something even discussed and proposed by SUHAKAM, by the prison department, even by the drug agency. So we need to find a way where society realizes that these drug abusers are not our regular criminals. They are offenders by law, but there's an abuse, so it's a mental health issue, it's a health issue. So we need another way of understanding and treating them like other countries. So if we move in that direction, a big portion of them will be out of the prison system. The second point is the overcrowding is also caused by remand prisoners, those waiting for their court cases, for sentencing. So maybe we need to also look into other offences that can be bailable.
Right.
There are also people discussing about the electronic tagging on your feet. So they don't need to be in prison. They
So
can be at home.
different options, right? I mean, there are quite, you have to kind of look at all the different options on the table. And I want to come back, Jerald, very quickly to the private prisons proposal. Now, the people who want this will say that it could reduce overcrowding. But on the other side, there are serious moral hazards to be contended with. There could be serious pitfalls here. I mean, it incentivizes maintaining and growing a prison population for profit. Do you see that as a significant pitfall?
Sorry, I didn't get the last part of what you said,
I mean,
Melisa.
for privatizing prisons will incentivize maintaining a prison population for profit. So it's easy. You have to make sure there are people, in the prisons for private entities to make a profit.
Exactly. So I think this is part of the duty and obligation of any government to manage the criminal justice system. So if you move to privatization, you sort of subcontract that duty to a private vendor, then the question comes, what are the obligations of the state on such matter? Because it's contractual. But you're right, it's about business, it's about profit. Is it because the concept now in the prison system in Malaysia is called rehabilitative justice. So actually the whole idea is to get people back to society, hopefully as normal as possible, away from criminality. So I think there's a lot of programs within. that doesn't want them to come into prison. And you're right, if it's privatization of prison, so why would that be part of their KPI? Because for them, it's management of the prisoners in the prison system. And I think the state government will have to think twice, because it's an expensive option while it takes off the burden of the state. I think that's not the route to go at this point. Let's work at fixing redistribution of prisoners in the prison by looking at the laws, what kind of criminal offences that need not come to prison, the drug offenders, are there abuses, are there other methods that are more effective? Because you and I know these are quite serial offenders, because they are addicted, they are abusing the drugs for themselves. So you put them into prison, nothing really much happens.
Jerald, in the last minute that we have, could you just help us understand where this proposal is coming from? It's a policy formulation type of debacle that we have in Malaysia. The minister seems to announce something without perhaps even a study being presented first. So do you know where and who wants to privatize prisons? Who wants to run them?
Good question, Sharaad, but I think the Commission has never had any discussion on this matter with the Home Ministry. Neither have we heard of such a proposal until when we all heard it together recently. So that's quite a fresh idea, but I see the motivation as trying to solve a problem, but I think without proper discussion, without proper analysis, and looking at other prison systems in other countries, whether it works, it's effective, I think we should not just jump the gun and try to do short, quick answers to something that has a longer-term problem at the core.
Thank you so much for speaking with us this evening, Jerald, sharing your insights. Now we're going to come back after this break with more on Consider This, so stay tuned.